We'll start with Spurs against Man City. Was that the most incredible game as a Spurs fan that you've ever experienced?
I'm just glad I'm here, to be honest. There was heart palpitations and shaking, and it took me a while to get over it.
Where the dog was shot in this particular tie, I think, was in the first leg. Guardiola got it all wrong, leaving Kevin De Bruyne and Leroy Sané out.
I've never heard that expression before in my life. You've enriched my day, Pete. Thank you for that.
At the start of the season, my two favourites for the Champions League and Ajax have eliminated both of them. Both teams were thoroughly spanked.
In terms of actually structuring the team, there's just not enough pieces to move around the ball, so it's going to be really interesting how they play that.
Hello and welcome to Goals Preview Show. I'm Jay Legate, and today things get a little bit intense as we move on to the Champions League semi-finals, and we'll be looking at Tottenham against Ajax. To help me unpick the game, we are joined by Goals Global Editor-in-Chief, James Dickens. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Pete, how are you doing?
Hello.
Our Chief Correspondent, always here. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, thank you very much for asking.
We'll start with Spurs against Man City, the game at the Etihad a couple of weeks ago. Was that the most incredible game as a Spurs fan that you've ever experienced?
Yes, I think it probably was. It's really difficult to try and rationalise and discuss that game. It was ludicrous and there was no structure to it. And that's why Spurs managed to get through in the end, I think, just because of the chaos. City couldn't control the game, and yeah, it was insane.
A lot of people always say that there's like that final stage, that final hurdle is where Spurs often fall down, and at the end it looked like that was going to happen again. Was it nice for that to not happen this time?
I don't know. I mean, it's where is this final hurdle? Because there's 3 more hurdles left. So no, I mean it was nice to kind of get over the line, especially in the circumstances with the VAR situation, which I'm just glad I'm here, to be honest. There was heart palpitations and shaking, and it took me a while to get over it. But yeah, that game's done now. Beat arguably the best team in the tournament, I think. And yeah, so bring on Ajax.
And you were at the game as well?
I certainly was.
What was the atmosphere like?
Unbelievable, as loud as I've ever seen it at the Etihad, and my ears were thoroughly ringing by the time I got out. Wonderful noise pulsating in a competition that Man City fans are kindly, largely, have got a bit of antipathy for because of how they've been treated by UEFA over the last few years, but they bought into it that night. And look, I think City were unlucky because they did everything they needed to do that night. They got all the goals they needed, they outscored Spurs as they needed to do, but where the dog was shot in this particular tie, I think, was in the first leg. Guardiola got it all wrong, leaving Kevin De Bruyne and Leroy Sané out, and the damage was done there, not by getting no away goal. I've
never heard that expression before in my life. You've enriched my day, Pete. Thank you for that. James mentioned about the VAR there.
Yeah.
It was an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah.
That is like a new development to Champions League this season, and obviously is going to be implemented in the Premier League next year.
Yeah.
What's your perspective on it, in what it brings to the game?
It's brilliant because you can't get a wrong call. There's still some things that are too subjective to go to VAR, but if somebody is offside, for example, well, you're either offside or you're not, and you've got a second chance with VAR to come on board and tell you whether the decision was wrong or not. And referees largely are supportive of these kind of developments because it gives them the support and it gives them belief in their own decision-making faculties because they know they'll be backed up whether they get the decision right.
I've heard people say that it's kind of better from a neutral perspective, but then if a goal is questioned and it gets given again, you get to celebrate it twice, or vice versa, no?
I think it's better from a TV point of view. I think that's really what the rule was, or the new system was brought in for. So as Pete rightly said, there'll be fewer wrong decisions, but that's all for TV. When you're in the stadium, you have no idea what's going on, and that's the concern. But for the governing bodies, that's not really an issue. It's such a small percentage of the fans who are consuming the games that it largely doesn't matter. It would be nice to create a system that actually informed the fans in the stadiums, and I think that will come, particularly actually in Spurs' new stadium, which has got an incredible connectivity. I think that would probably it will really help. But yeah, I just think. It's also the rules. There's issues with the rules that the referees don't understand them and they interpret them differently.
And the handball seems to need clarification.
Yeah, and I think like where there's, as you said, where there's offside, that's clear. The rules are still confusing, and it just gives the referee a chance to look at that and make his interpretation, which could be wrong anyway.
One of the biggest blows for Spurs from that second leg was obviously losing Son. I mean, how much of that is going to impact them in the game against Ajax, especially considering they already don't have Harry Kane?
I think the Spurs first team picture, I think it can survive without the absence of, well, quite a large number of individuals within it, because I think the system is quite good. So if they lose Vertonghen, they put Foyth in, for example, I don't think they'll lose too much. But there are some outstanding individuals within this Spurs team that are irreplaceable. And at the moment, Son Heung-min, for me, is one of those. His two finishes were just clinical or world-class finishes. They're Cristiano Ronaldo level finishes in the Etihad. Ice cold blood running through his veins to score those two goals and get Spurs through in the end.
What's it like from your perspective, that in terms of not having Son there?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I think one of the main, and we'll probably get to this later, one of the main areas I think of weakness for Ajax is their fullbacks. And I think having Son against one of them would be, and Mora potentially against the other, would be really ideal with Harry Kane. You don't have that, and so there's no Lamella probably because he's perpetually injured. So I think in terms of actually structuring the team, they really are very thin, because you need to move Son forward, potentially you need to move Mora forward, but there's also no central midfielders, so you need to move Ali and you need to move Eriksen back. You end up, there's just not enough pieces to move around the board. So it's going to be really interesting how they play that, which then brings in the likes of Fernando Llorente into play, and he's going to probably have to start at least in the first leg, and Son will come back in the second leg. It's going to be very difficult.
And I think performance level wise for the last few games, I don't think Spurs have been there. In the Premier League game against Man City, where they lost, I don't think they were on the level. Against Brighton, I don't think they were on the level. And in the second leg, I thought they were overwhelmed by Man City. So I think they're kind of hanging in there by the skin of their teeth a little bit performance-wise at the minute. I know the results are still kind of there. They're hanging around the top four picture for now, and they're into the Champions League semi-finals. But I think there'll be a few causes for alarm within how they're playing that will have Mauricio Pochettino looking for solutions for the semi-final.
But in terms of that, I mean, you mentioned Brighton, they still got the result, and against Man City, they got through it. Is it that positive momentum that might carry them through these last few games?
It might do, but it relies on players coming back. They're so thin in every kind of, apart from at the back, they're thin in every position, and it's been interesting, particularly with Eric Dyer and Harry Winks and how they've been used recently. Eric Dyer played against in a few games ago, and then hasn't been used. He's been on the bench. Harry Winks played the first leg against City, and you could see the control he brought to the game. He's got a recurring injury that's going to need some either an operation or a lot of rest over the summer, so he's not been played at all. Once you have that point of those two players in midfield, Sissoko's not around. But if you have Dyer and Winks, you can then start to put together Ali and Eriksen, Mora, maybe Llorente, and it starts to look, or you go for an extra central defender, push the fullbacks on. There are some things you can do, but without those two, one of them is going to have to play because they're so stretched.
And that almost dictates how they approach the game, and it will probably change what would normally be a home leg performance from Spurs into maybe more of an away leg.
I think as long as they don't concede an away goal, as it were, Spurs should be okay in the tie. I know we said that twice now about Ajax, so I'm underestimating Ajax. You know, and Amsterdam's not going to be an easy place for Spurs to go. But I think Pochettino will be confident in what he has in terms of his game plan and the individuals that he will be expecting to stand up and take those one by the scruff of the neck. And you're looking at players like Dele Alli, of course, and Christian Eriksen, who are, you know, if not on the level of Ajax's best players, they're probably a cut above that, even so. So, yeah, a difficult one in terms of the number of players they've got absent and the number of players that maybe are in the team, but had other players been available, probably wouldn't be in the team. I'm thinking about people like Kieran Trippier, Danny Rose, maybe Victor Wanyama, although he's been doing okay lately. They're players that it'd be nice to switch them out if you had the option, and Llorente, of course, but Pochettino's been in a position where he's just had to persist with them because there's nothing else there.
Will they be feeling it as much, though, considering that this train is still going?
Yeah, I think they are feeling it. I mean, as Pete said, the form recently has been appalling. The only reason they're still in the top four is because of the failings of other teams in and around that area. So they need a boost of someone coming back in. not having the most important player, arguably, Son, certainly in those big games, suspended, and you need those bigger players to step up. Christian Eriksen stepped up, although he wasn't great. He stepped up against Brighton. He needs to have an incredible game in there, and I think they all need to perform to a high level, because although they've got experience, the team that Ajax are going to be putting out individually, they're young but they're so talented, and they're strong in pretty much every position. There are weaknesses, and I'm sure the thing that Spurs do have in their favour is the manager. And I mean, the two centre halves are world class, but the manager is a person who can put these pieces in position and make Spurs have a chance, really.
Will that fill Pochettino with confidence, the fact that there are these issues everywhere, but in terms of the back line and in dealing with the young attacking players that Ajax have on offer, will that at least reassure him?
I think so, yeah. I think they're very strong at the back. Obviously, Vertonghen and Alderweireld are the best pairing in the Premier League, arguably in the world. And then you've got the likes of Juan Foyth and Davinson Sanchez. Juan Foyth is an amazing prospect. Sanchez, he's kind of good, he's still very young, and obviously he came from Ajax, so they know him very well. He's up and down. The fullbacks are issues. Danny Rose has picked up recently. Kieran Trippier is just not good enough. I think that's clear now. The World Cup was an anomaly really for him, but there isn't anyone else. Serge Aurier may be back, but I don't think he'll have time to get some games under his belt. So I think the fullback areas, like the same with Ajax, they're kind of weak for Spurs at the moment.
Moving on to Ajax, they did it again against Juventus. I mean, their perspective on the whole tournament now, they must be feeling pretty confident, having taken two huge scalps.
Two huge scalps. Probably at the start of the season, my two favourites for the Champions League, and Ajax have eliminated both of them. And it was nothing fortunate about it. I think both teams were thoroughly spanked when they needed to be spanked, and Ajax deservedly through. Ajax are probably the most analysed team in the competition at this stage, considering what they've done against Juve and Real Madrid. There's going to be no surprises in how they play. They're fearless. They want the ball, no matter what stadium they're playing in. They want to get the ball to their most creative, their quickest, their most exciting players, and they want to score goals. If they concede a goal, their heads don't go down, because they always believe that they've got 2 or 3 goals in them up the other end, with players like Neres, players like Dusan Tadic, and all credit to them. They're deservedly into the semi-finals.
When we previewed the quarterfinals, we focused on the importance of De Jong in the team. In that second leg against Juventus, De Ligt really came to the fore, and as he has done for them all season, how key is he to this whole
He's huge.
journey?
He's absolutely huge. Centre backs have been in focus here. We're talking about Alderweireld and Jan Vertonghen. He will be the best centre back in the world. There's no doubt about that. So long as he stays healthy. The partnership between him and Virgil van Dijk in the Dutch national team now, with Frankie de Jong just in front of them, I mean, that is an unbelievable triangle for them to build on for the next 10 years or so. And it's just that he's got it all. You can watch old videos of De Ligt when he's 12, 13 years old wearing the Ajax shirt, but he's wearing number 8, because when they're training players, if they've got a prospect at centre back, they'll stick him into centre midfield so he learns how to play the ball. So he's got that capability. He's not just a big lump, even though he is a big lump. He can play football, and he's a leader. And plus, he's 19 years of age, and he's got about 150 games under his belt, loads of Dutch caps. He's probably about 3 or 4 years ahead of where he should be in terms of his development. And I don't think Ajax will wave goodbye in a sad manner to De Ligt in the summer. They'll think he's done all he can for us. On you go, earn us 70, 80 million.
You mentioned earlier on about the fullbacks for Ajax being a potential area that Spurs could exploit. I mean, how do you see that happening?
It's interesting. I think, Veltman on the right and Tagliafico on the left. Tagliafico's obviously been linked with Spurs and various other Premier League clubs. They're very good Champions League players, but I'm not sure they're at the level of the likes of De Ligt and De Jong and Ziyech and those guys. So I think potentially if Spurs can isolate them against, Son in the second leg, Moura, if you can get Lamela fit and on the pitch, I think they're areas that can be exploited. But De Ligt is a leader in there, and he's the one who's going to move those players around and define the structure of the back four for Ajax, so those players aren't exposed. Same with Daley Blind, and potentially if you're Fernando Llorente, you just go and lean on Daley Blind. But you probably get the Ligt behind you, and then you're in trouble. So it's difficult, but it is certainly an area where they can be got at.
Spurs have had a very, very difficult period in terms of the turnaround of fixtures, and it's not slowing down for them at all, right up into the wire. Ajax, it's slightly different.
Yeah, it certainly is different. Basically, in the Netherlands, they like to play the last 2 match days all together at once. So match day 33, match day 34, everybody kicks off together. So there was supposed to be a full round of fixtures yesterday on Sunday. But Ajax wanted that game moved because they wanted more rest before, obviously, the Spurs game tomorrow. The Saturday wasn't available because it's King's Day in the Netherlands, so that would have caused issues with policing. Friday obviously wasn't available either. So what they've done is actually move the last 2 Eredivisie rounds till after the Champions League rounds. So Ajax will play the first leg, then they'll play the cup final, then they'll play the second leg, and then they'll complete the Eredivisie campaign. So I know people in the UK complain a little bit about the scheduling and how Premier League teams are at a disadvantage in the Champions League. Well, hey, look what the Dutch are doing for Ajax. Not with the approval of every team in the Eredivisie, I'm at it, because some people, I mean, if you're a Feyenoord fan, you couldn't care less what Ajax are doing in the Champions League, and particularly PSV, who are pushing them close for the title this year. So, but that's it. Ajax have that advantage on Spurs at least.
Is that a little bit scary?
Yeah, it's a little bit scary. You can see why they've done it. I mean, it helps their coefficient in Europe to try and get more of their clubs in. So, in theory, I mean, I know they're not, but they should be for it. So, yeah, it's going to be difficult.
Looking at the Ajax team, and in terms of all these young players they have at their disposal, in there as well is Dusan Tadic, who was obviously at Southampton and played under Mark Hughes there and Pellegrino. What's been the difference, him going into this team? Obviously, the Eredivisie maybe isn't as demanding as the Premier League, but the way he's performed in the Champions League games as well has been on another level, no?
Yeah, well, they play 2 different ways. So you'll see in the Eredivisie they'll play with a battering ram up front. They'll play with Kasper Dolberg or else with Klaas-Jan Huntelaar. But in the Champions League they'll play with Tadic as that false 9 position, which gives them, I suppose, a little bit more flexibility when they have to defend. And once they get him on the ball, they counter very well with him, looking for the wingers on either side, or Van der Beek as well. What's different about him at Southampton, I think he probably just had enough of the Premier League at that stage. He had 4 years in the Premier League. It didn't quite happen for him. He scored, I think, an average of about 5 goals a year. Huge number of managers he's played under, well, maybe not a huge number, he's played under multiple managers at Southampton, and he was never really, I suppose, a key man in the team, even though he probably should have been based on his talent. But Ajax had a plan, him and Daley Blind coming back into the Eredivisie. They had this, flowering generation, Frankie de Jong and Matthias de Ligt we've spoken about. And they felt they needed to get them that little bit further, maybe in Europe or maybe back to the top of the Eredivisie where they haven't won in sort of 5 years. And they needed a little bit of experience, people who knew the league, people who knew how to play in Europe and sort of knew the rough and tumble of playing competitive, experienced men's football. And I think in that regard, they got the recruitment spot on with Blind and Dusan Tadic.
How do you feel about making predictions involving clubs where there's emotion?
Yeah, it is. It's difficult. However, I'm neutral and I'm a journalist.
Of course.
And it's fine. No, I mean, I fundamentally think that Spurs are not the favourites for this. And I think going into it in that way is emotionally fine. It's kind of, I think Spurs will probably lose over the 2 legs.
Expectations.
Yeah, and I think if Harry Kane was fit, if Son was available, we've gone through the injuries. If they were all available, I think I'd be a lot more nervous and a lot more tense about it. But a top 4 finish in a Champions League semi-final is far beyond what Spurs thought they were going to achieve this season. So I think you're at a point where you're happy, and then anything else is a bonus.
What do you think?
I think after putting out Real Madrid and Juventus, I think Ajax will be disappointed if they don't win the Champions League this year. I think confidence is going to be absolutely sky high. They're scoring goals for fun. They've got some of the most promising talent and some of the best peak talent in Europe right now. And I think there's a hiding coming Spurs way somewhere along the way, because the form hasn't been there, and I know they've kind of been squeaking by. And I think they better hope and pray that they're still in the tie come the second leg.
Well, so it looks like it could be all up against it for Spurs. Thank you very much again, Pete, for coming in today.
A pleasure as always, Jay.
And thank you for coming on your first time on the preview show.
Cheers, Jay. It was fun.
No worries. And thank you for watching as well. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you can get notifications to all our upcoming shows, including our next preview show, which will be on May the 6th, Monday, May the 6th, for Liverpool against Barcelona. See you later. Bye-bye.